Okay, so welcome to Vibe, everyone. I'm Gary Brightman. This is Vibe Book and Music Shop. We're coming to you live on Facebook in Mui Wo on Lantau Island in Hong Kong. So today we've got an audience of people here, small because of COVID and everything. We've got to be careful. And today's, so we'll just wait a sec. That's all right.
Hi.
Okay, so
welcome.
today we have Chris Maden, stroke Maden, coming to do a talk for us. Chris is the author of Price is Price book, which was released last November, I think.
Yep.
Chris, yeah. So Chris is going to do a talk on the book for about 20 minutes, and then he's going to throw it open to questions and answers. Chris has lived in Hong Kong, I'm sure he'll tell you this, for some number of years now. So, I'd be interested in, what was life like then and what did he get up to? And so think up some good questions. I don't suppose many of you have read the book. I have. So have these two. Louise and Max. Good. All right, and with that, and without further ado, I'll pass you over to Chris Maden.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Remember in the old days when I first came to Hong Kong, I used to do a bit park acting for ATV, and you had to look for the little tapes on the floor. It's like, okay, stand there. Otherwise the cameras weren't in focus. So thank you very much for coming to this little book. It's not really a book launch anymore, but this book talk. Thank you very much, Gary, for having me, and to Phil for the electronics, all of which are totally beyond me. This is probably my first time I've knowingly been on FaceTime, so it's a new experience for me. Okay, I feel like I'm putting myself out there. So probably a bit about me, and then I'll move on to the book. Okay. I arrived in Hong Kong in 1987. Actually July the 1st, so 10 years to the day before the handover. And I arrived in Hong Kong at the end of an era. It was just on the cusp of going from very much a Wild West sort of environment with all sorts of characters, guys who had fallen off the boat, still some guys who had fallen off the boat at the end of the Second World War and had never quite got round to going home or had forgotten where home is. And over the next 10 years, Hong Kong started to professionalise. We had the Black October crash in October, just after I'd arrived, when the guy that ran the stock exchange decided to shut it so that all of his buddies could cash out, which meant everyone else got completely screwed. All that changed in the next 10 years, and also it was also on the cusp. When I first came to Hong Kong, nobody took China seriously. Within 3 years, 80% of the manufacturing was already moved to Shenzhen, and I kind of arrived here after backpacking around Asia. I went into the electronics industry. All that moved north within the first 5 years, and Hong Kong became a very different place. And I guess what inspired this book is a lot of the characters I met then. So this book is set in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and it's about one of these chances that turns up. In this case, Stanley Price turns up with the Gurkhas. He's sent to patrol the border. That doesn't go down too well, so he gets himself out of the army, and that's when the misadventures really get going. It's a somewhat tragicomic book. And I wrote it, actually the first draft was written in about 6 weeks before I got married. Wife, pink shirt. And it just kind of flowed off the edge of the pen, and I showed it to a few people and sent it to a few agents in the UK, and it got nowhere. And I got a little bit discouraged, put it to one side, and then I came back to it about 2 or 3 years ago and thought, well, there's enough of a book here that it ought to be viable. And I went through several rounds of editing. There's an outfit in the UK called the Literary Consultancy, which is quite expensive, but you can pay to have the book assessed, and you get very professional manuscript assessments saying what the strong points are, what the weak points are. And I went through 2 or 3 cycles of those. I then decided to self-publish the book because I thought, well, I can spend a year and a half writing to agents for something which most English publishers probably wouldn't be very interested in anyway, or else I can self-publish it here in Hong Kong, see how it goes, and if there's some positive vibes and feedback, I can launch it in the UK, and if it turns out to be a complete flop, then I just cut my losses, and that's that. Okay. So that's the history of the book. Susanna, you were asking about the editing, so welcome, please. And then when I decided to self-publish, it was, I think a lot of people regard self-publishing as like you turn it into an ebook, stick it on Amazon, and that's it, you're going to make billions. And it doesn't really work that way. I'm still coming to grips with how you sell on Amazon. And in fact, my good buddy and also local celebrity Larry Fane, I was just having a chat with him because he's full of tips and he's been there before and I haven't. So that side of things is still work in progress. But in terms of getting the book going, the Hong Kong International Literary Festival was kind enough to give me a spot, so I launched there. Hong Kong's actually quite a benevolent place to get started for a small book because we have friends at Radio Hong Kong, Radio Television Hong Kong, who are willing to give a few minutes of airtime. Saturday Morning Post is also supportive. HK Buzz did a review for me. And the bookshops have also been very friendly, not just Gary and Vibe, but also Bookazine in over there and Kidnapped Out in Sai Kung. So it's kind of been a very friendly experience. Okay, I'm gonna do my first reading from the book if I can remember where I put my spectacles. Yeah. There. I'm new to spectacles, so I keep losing them, or breaking them, or having them fall off. So, yeah, there we are. So as I said, the main character is this guy, Stanley Featherstone Hall Price, and you'll find out how that works in another bit. He was born in Rhodesia. He has this sort of very privileged expat upbringing, but is basically completely useless, so he's too thick to get into university, and he doesn't really want to be a banker, which is what he's offered, so he kind of escapes all of that and joins the army. And let me just read the end of chapter 1 so you can get a feel for how he ends up there. So he ends up with the Gurkhas, and he said, I'd had to put in a tour of duty before the army would equip an expedition, because his dream is to go around and, you know, climb tall mountains and cross icy continents and stuff like that. So he thinks that he can do this by joining the army, and it will get him to fund an expedition. I'd had to put in a tour of duty before the army would equip an expedition, but there were plenty of places where I could make my mark. I scanned the list of postings: Kenya, Kilimanjaro and the vast plains of the Serengeti, not to mention the handsome woman of the Maasai. A communist insurgency in the jungles of Malaya, surrounded by the dusky beauties of the Malays. A revolution in the no longer quite so Dutch East Indies, in the company of whatever women were there. I wasn't quite sure, but I was sure of one thing. Anywhere but Hong Kong, I replied, that barren rock. So that's how he's posted to Hong Kong, and you can tell from that little package what his primary interest in life at that stage is. He joins the Gurkhas, he goes on the lines and he's patrolling, and he starts to get rather disillusioned with the patrols, because at the time that he is posted to Hong Kong, the Cultural Revolution is in full swing, so there were hundreds of thousands of refugees coming across the border. Historically, I think Hong Kong's population went up by about 500,000 in 2 years, just during that patch. And his job is basically to send them back. And he becomes increasingly involved in the local Hong Kong, and he becomes aware of what they're being sent back to, and the contrast between his duties as a soldier and the ideology he's been brought up on, which is, you know, this sort of idea of Britain as being a free empire and all the rest of it. And so he hits the bottle. And this is what happened to him. So he says, drinking does not necessarily widen one's social circle, but being an all-round cricketer who happens to drink a lot does. I was invited to join a club. It had tennis and squash courts, a cricket pitch, and most important of all, a bar. Not just any old bar, not at all resembling the squalid affairs near the barracks, but a proper room of wood panelling on which were hung photos of sports teams long gone and current. It had a footrail along the bar counter and a countertop of peen topper. Boring, said Forsyth, who is his best friend in the army. So he sort of verges off into the establishment. He manages to get out of the army under rather dubious circumstances. He kind of falls for a local lady, and they have a she's a bar girl in Wan Chai, so he becomes rather over acquainted with the Wan Chai of that era. The World of Susie Wong was actually a very useful reference book for that. People say that must have been you, and so well, I was 5 years old at this era. And so he then he leaves the army and he joins the civil service. And this, of course, was in the 60s, so Hong Kong was just enormously corrupt, spectacularly corrupt. And one of the inspirations for this book was, I mentioned that I had to get used to standing exactly where the little tape lines on the floor were with APV. In the late 90s, ATV ran a program, Oloji Chu Jiao, which means I come from Chu Chao, but it was actually a kind of disguised, I suppose you would call it, biopic of Li Ka-shing, who comes from Hong Kong's most wealthy man, who comes from Chu Chao. And that was set in the 60s, and I was rather stereotyped as an actor in ATV. I was either a priest or a cop, okay? And there's once I did a diplomat as well. And they gave me this great part to play. So it was set, that particular bit of the series was set in the 60s, and this cop, Inspector Robinson, he was on the take, okay, in a fairly spectacular way. And it so happened I hit it off with the main actor, and this series was hugely successful by ATV standards. Stanley kind of follows in these footsteps. Okay, so he joins the civil service and he ends up posted to the factories inspectorate, where he's supposed to be going around, and the book is fairly accurate in terms of history. So one of the things that happened in the 60s was that there's a lot of trade union activism in Hong Kong about working conditions in factories, which were pretty shocking. Stanley goes off, he gets posted into the factories inspectorate, and he soon finds out, as he's living more and more beyond his means, that there is more and more sources of income of the unofficial method. Okay. So he goes through a couple of years there before he gets caught out, and they set up, actually more than a couple of years. He gets tossed out when the RCAC get founded. Insult to Chinese ancient custom was what ICAC stood for at the time, and ends up in the plastics business. Okay. And there's a series of misadventures there, but a recurring theme of this is there's a series of girlfriends he goes through, and he does actually get more and more addicted to the bad size, you know, the sleaze and the sex and stuff like that. And to his delight, his plastics manufactory ends up selling sex toys, so I have a bit of fun with that. And if I go here, this is where he meets his main character. Yeah, so one of the, without spoiling the book, Uncle Yan is a kind of local big shot who is a very successful businessman and kind of has a bit of a soft spot for Stanley, and supports Stanley's Uncle Yan owns the factory. Stanley has an agency for the factory, and here's Stanley. Uncle Yan decreed that I was to go on a sales trip to America. Find an American, I pleaded. But international telephone calls in those distant days cost an arm and a leg, had to be booked in advance, and lacked the personal touch. Quite unnecessary, he said, who was going through his Winston Churchill phase. I think you are the man for the job. Uncle Yan at the beginning of the book can barely bring together a sentence. The trip was expensive and lonely. The Americans were as insular then as now. Some regarded Hong Kong as part of Japan or Korea. One asked if we rode camels over the desert. I told him we did. The only part I came close to enjoying was New York. You're the guy with the English plastics, my contact there said, Axel. As it wasn't a question, I didn't answer. Goddamn stuffed shirt, limeys. I got some stuff I want you to do. Follow me. He put me in a limousine the size of a tea clipper, and we sailed off through the Big Apple's traffic. My goddamn son of a bitch father, God rest his soul, gave me the stupid German name. Ran away from the fucking Nazis and is still me. Fucking guy could never leave German in his head. Know what I mean? Son of a bitch. But I ain't fucking nothing compared to Featherstone. How goddamn fucking Fenshaw. Fen fucking what? Stanley's middle name is spelt Featherstone Hall, which is actually one of these marvellous English archaicisms. It's pronounced Fenshaw. And, so we have some fun there. My middle name, I'll be goddamned. This brings Stanley into his main source of income for the rest of the book, which is the sex toys, and from there I'll stop spoiling the book for you. You'll have to read it to find out more. I think that's all I've really prepared to say per se. I'm very happy to answer questions, and of course delighted if anyone would like me to sign copies or whatever.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So what we'll do now is questions, and we'll basically just stick your hand up if you've got a question, and I'll come to you, ask you, and hold the mic, and then we'll go from there. Any questions?
Thank you.
Do you find Stanley a charismatic character?
You've read the book, haven't you? One reviewer compared him to Harry Flashman of the George MacDonald Fraser novels. In other words, a complete cad, bounder and horrible. But nonetheless, you can't help liking him in some ways, even as you know you should hate him. And I think there's a little bit of that in Stanley. He's sort of...
Got the sense that you quite admire him in some respects.
I think he is one of these characters. I mean, I've met the character itself is kind of a mishmash of 2 or 3 of the people I met, real people. Almost everyone in this book is real. A lot of people say, is it you? Well, no, it's not me. But nearly all of the characters in this book are in some sense real.
And I think that comes through strongly, the authenticity of them. I'm very
Thank
glad
you.
that I wasn't living in Hong Kong at that time.
Yeah, so sexism, misogynism, all of that stuff was very much taken for granted. I don't know if he was, I mean, he is what he is. He's definitely a product of his times, you know, and if he were here today, he's not. He's in Pokhara in Nepal at the moment. He makes a cameo in one of my other books. I think he would be proudly unrepentant of the way he was. He'd be the sort of guys that just says, well, that's what it was. Everyone was doing it, you know. I don't think he would attempt to defend his actions or try and justify them by the standards today. In fact, I think he'd probably violently resist that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have written this book. The book's written in first person, by the way, so it takes the form of a mock memoir.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
And then I didn't read the book, obviously, but what pushed you to write about this guy? What did you want to, was it because you wanted to give a testimony about the time, or because there was something that you wanted to explore about the guy, or I don't know?
There was definitely a sense of, as I said, when I arrived in Hong Kong, it was really just at the cusp, it was just at the end of the era depicted in the novel. And most of the other books about Hong Kong, a lot of the mainstream stuff is kind of slight fantasy. Like James Clavell's Hong Kong books are this Hong Kong that most of us never have access to. You know, it's all these guys living on the peak, working for taipans of Jardines and Swires and these companies. And this, even if you look at Le Carre's The Honourable Schoolboy, yeah, it's very detailed research and the rest of it, but it's not actually about Hong Kong. Hong Kong is just as kind of a setting he uses in the novel. Even John Lancaster's Fragrant Harbour, it's, okay, the books, you can like or dislike the books, but it's actually set over quite a long period, it's about a century. And I felt there was something quite special in that era. You know, from the mid-60s to the mid-80s, Hong Kong's population increased by a factor of about 5. It went from being a dot on the map, where Gary was asking about the pronunciation of my second name, Maden. When I was growing up in the 70s in Glasgow, my nickname was Made in Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong was just becoming famous. And so it went from being nothing to actually this kind of mover and shaker in the world. Something like, when I arrived, something like 70% of consumer electronics were manufactured in Hong Kong. A similar proportion of clothes were manufactured here. Yeah, shirts, underpants, the normal stuff. And it come from nowhere. But it was always on the edge. You know, it wasn't like it wasn't as if some venture capitalists come and went, okay, let's do Hong Kong. You know, this is all very embryonic. It came out of nowhere. No one saw it coming, and there were quite a lot of characters, and they went. I think judging them by today's standards, yeah, they're on the edge, and nearly everyone I think is in this book is in some way on the edge, and I wanted to kind of capture that, how this combination of opportunity and incompetence. But also, in some ways, hard work actually created the Hong Kong that we knew, that has come to exist today. So that was I guess that was the motivation of it. It's to give a fictional and I hope fairly entertaining. I know Stanley Price is not everyone's cup of tea as a character, but it's to give an authentic account of the Hong Kong of that era.
Okay, any other questions? Suzanne?
Thanks. Chris, who's your most interesting female character?
Oh boy. That's a good question, actually. All of Stanley's girlfriends are much stronger characters than he is. Stanley is very weak. Okay. One of the reviewers on Amazon got it very well. He said Stanley, every time he's given the opportunity to do something, he does the wrong thing. And that carries through pretty much the whole book. Probably the strongest, I'd say the strongest of the female characters is probably the first one, Lily, who's his first, she's a bar girl. Yeah, she would be the strongest of the characters. She's much smarter than Stanley is. And trying to think who else would be in there. Probably, yeah, she would be the strongest by far. His second one after that, Jo, she kind of goes off the rails a bit in her own right. And then the Venus, who he meets about halfway through the book and falls for in a big way, is she's kind of a developing individual during the book, so she ends up becoming quite strong, but at the beginning she's too much of a teenager for that distinction to really meaningfully apply. Good question though, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I just
Mike?
wondered what the impetus was to write it when you did originally back in, about 1990 or something you said?
99.
Okay. Or what happened at the time that sort of gave you the time to do it?
Actually, I had no time to write it. So at the time, there were 2 or 3 work things that were happening, which were all very busy. The biggest project was getting married. So I kind of wrote the book in 20-minute, half-hour, 1-hour bursts when I just had a little bit of time and fill it up. And I think that's one reason the book has worked out to be very episodic. It's a book of lots of short episodes that are a tapestry. What got me onto writing was the Hong Kong Civil Service, who had taken me on as a consultant, paid me a vast amount of money to basically sit in an office and do nothing, and to be a rubber stamp to a whole lot of really nasty, objectionable things I saw around me. Just money being squandered on stuff that was not only not being used to do anything good, it was actually being used to make situations worse. But it was all about power and spending money. It was nothing to do. And I actually got very disillusioned with that. And eventually I just resigned. I'd had enough. I couldn't stand it. And then, of course, I thought, well, okay, I better actually do something. So this wasn't the first novel I completed. I wrote 2 others before this. But neither of those were really, well, one of them I've completely rehashed and will probably bring out, but it's set in a part of China we're not allowed to talk about, so I won't be publishing it here in Hong Kong. And the other one was just garbage.
Very honest. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sure, Sandrine.
Having been part of Hong Kong's history and having studied it, what is your take on what's going on right now, and what do you see the future of Hong Kong to be?
Yeah, okay, so let's try and answer this one in one which will keep me out in a way that won't
Get you arrested.
yes. I guess, okay, for me, my Cantonese is it's not optimally fluent anymore, but it used to be very fluent. And for about, I don't know, 30 years, people were asking me, "Why you speak such good Cantonese? Why don't you learn Mandarin? You could go and live in you could go and work in the mainland." And thank you for coming. And my answer to that was, "You've just answered your own question." You know, I think a lot of what made Hong Kong distinctive is we're losing very quickly at the moment, which is a terrible. I think it's bad for Hong Kong. I think it's even worse for China. You know, when I mentioned I was backpacking around Asia for actually a year and a half before I came to Hong Kong. So when I arrived here, I had £5 to my name. And I spent about 4 months of that in China. Well, 1 month out west in Xinjiang, about 6 weeks in mainland China, and about 2 months in Tibet. And I'm eternally grateful to the Communist Party of China for the invention of the foreign exchange certificate, which created a phenomenal black market, which enabled me to see China for about 1/10 of the cost it would have done if they hadn't done that. And China has come a long way, don't get me wrong. You know, when I first went, this was 1987, this is 1986 actually. You know, you go around Beijing and there wasn't a single private car on the road. You know, you just get these occasional, once a day you may see one of these black old Russian Soviet things go past with probably someone important inside, and that was it. Everyone was on bicycles, and off on the sticks. Most people didn't even have bicycles. But Hong Kong was this incredibly free, vibrant place, and China back then, I used to almost be able to fall asleep dreaming of the national anthem because they woke you up with megaphones every morning at 5 o'clock. And that conformity is what distinguishes China from Hong Kong, in my view. And I think Hong Kong's got a real challenge to maintain that kind of plurality. I'm not saying it can't be done. Hong Kong has battled back from a few kicks to the groin, so to speak, but I think this one's going to be challenging. And I think it's pretty clear what the political intention is, that Hong Kong is going to be just another town in China, and we may keep the legal system because it's kind of an ornamental thing that investment bankers like, but we don't really want it. You know? So yeah, I'm not wildly optimistic. Certainly the Hong Kong I wrote about here is gone. Okay. But a lot of the spirit, the entrepreneurial spirit, the can-do, you know, let's just give it a try. So what if you fail? Try again, you know. I still see that, you know. We live in Sham Shui Po and we have little businesses popping up, and most of them within 6 months. But, you know, there is still a spirit left, and I hope it's strong enough to
Okay, good. Question then.
Oh.
Do you regret the passing of the more sort of louche and sleazy times in Hong Kong? Not sleazy. Wild West times is a more neutral way of describing it.
I think you just have to look. You just have to know where to look. No, it was a time and a place, and it was already becoming painfully apparent, even by the early 90s, just how out of sync that mode of living was with the rest of the world. So no, I don't regret it, and I don't intend this to be a tribute or a memorialization of that. I wanted it to be authentic, and I didn't want this to be a book which in any way judged that era by the standards of this era. Certainly not with the character I had. He'd be constitutionally incapable of it. But no, those times are no longer with us. And the Hong Kong we have now is a lot better, you know. the book doesn't really go into this sort of stuff, but homosexuality, for example, was a still crime on the books when I arrived in Hong Kong. They didn't actually take it off the books until the mid-90s. There was enormous prejudice. It was a very misogynistic lifestyle. If you go to the clubs depicted in here, you wouldn't see a woman in the bar, ever. It's not that they're banned, they just weren't welcome. And there are areas of most clubs from which women were actually banned. It was considered, it wasn't merely normal for men to philander. It was kind of considered a bit weird if you didn't. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you have girlfriends? And yeah, and prostitution was rampant. And that's not just in the expat community, it was rampant right across Hong Kong. And it was a very exploitative town. You know, there's a reason Hong Kong was so competitive on the world stage, and that's because, you know, they're employing children who should have been at school. They were not really taking proper safety precautions in factories. One of the reasons all that stuff moved north is because in the early days in China they didn't really care very much, or it just took them too much by surprise. So that cavalier attitude has its limits, and I think Hong Kong changed a lot for the better after this era in terms of the awareness of those sorts of things. So yeah, it was what it was. But you know, there's a philosopher called Ludwig Wittgenstein, and there's this thing in philosophy called Wittgenstein's ladder. Okay, he's using it in totally different context, but the idea is that once you've walked up the ladder, you kick it away because you don't need it anymore. And this era was Hong Kong's ladder. It got it to a certain state, but if it had stuck with that, it would have failed. Yeah, and there was this awareness, as I said, in the late 80s and early 90s. Most people by then had realised that the way they'd been doing things in the 60s and 70s were not really fit for purpose in the 90s and 2000s. I wish I could say the same about what's going on now.
Okay, anybody else? All good? Well, just to say, Chris Maden's book, Price is Price, available today at Vibe. $98. I'm sure if you speak very nicely to him, he'll dedicate it to you. And
I have the signing pen.
he's got the signing pen. And I'd just like to thank you very much for coming along and giving a good précis of the book and a good honest chat and an interesting
Thank you very much for having me,
chat.
Gary.
Yeah.
It's been great to be here.
Cheers, Chris.
Cheers.
All the best. Thank you.
And the pen is here. The pen is here.